Well, it's a dire warning for one of Saskatchewan's most important economic sectors, and it's something affecting us all. According to a recent report from RBC, about 40% of Canadian farmers are expected to retire in the next 10 years. On top of that, 66%, or two-thirds, have no succession plan. To fill the gap, the report suggests Canada update its immigration program to specifically bring in 30,000 farm-focused newcomers. Evan Fraser is co-author of the report. He's director of the Errol Food Institute at the University of Guelph.
We currently rely on something called a temporary foreign agricultural worker program, which brings something like 15,000 in people, largely from Latin America and the Caribbean, in every single year to plant our asparagus and pick our apples and weed our strawberry fields. And so we have a history in this country of bringing tens of thousands of foreign migrants in every year to work in the agricultural sector. That only scratches the surface of the labor shortage facing the sector. So what we're proposing in this report as one of a number of potential ways of addressing this problem is to focus immigration policy on agriculture. We've done this with other sectors. We've brought workers in to support oil and gas and IT and tech and things like that. We're saying that we need something more than just a temporary foreign worker program to shore up the agricultural programs. Sector of the economy, we need something that's more permanent based, that offers migrants a pathway to permanent citizenship. And I think, again, we have to put this in the context of last year, there were 1 million new Canadians coming to our country, largely as economic migrants, as part of our country's immigration policy to bolster our economy through migration. So this is part of a much bigger conversation about the value that migration brings to our country in terms of our economic growth. I believe that migration is a vital short-term measure to address what is a really serious labor shortage in a critical sector of our economy. It is not the only way that we will fix this problem. We also have to fix this problem through attracting more bright young Canadians into the sector, training Canadians and making the ag food sector more attractive to young people with the prospect of good jobs, and also telling young people that if you enter the sector, you'll be able to help address one of the big sustainability challenges of the age, which is how to feed ourselves in a healthy, nutritious way without while dealing with climate change and without destroying biodiversity. And then the third part of the portfolio that we talk about is, of course, mechanization and automation. And that's the history of agriculture writ large. I mean, 10,000 years of experiments using technology to make labor go farther. So we need to be investing in all three of those areas: migration, training, and mechanization and automation, in order to address this massive challenge that we're facing as a country.
That was Evan Fraser, co-author of a report by RBC that warns that 40% of Canadian farmers are expected to retire within the next decade. 66% of them have no succession plan. Well, today on Blue Sky, we're talking about who's going to take over Saskatchewan's farming operations when that large group of farmers does finally retire. We're going to speak to an immigrant from Pakistan who's trying to break into the ag industry. We'll hear from a farmer near Swift Current who says it's almost impossible for young people to afford to get into the profession. We'll hear from a Hutterite farming operation near Swift Current and a farmer from Moosomin who employs 30 people to farm his 30,000 acres. Our first guest today is a professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Saskatchewan. Stuart Smythe is on the line now in Saskatoon. Stuart, thanks for your time again today.
My pleasure, Garth. Good afternoon.
Stuart, how has the rising average age of Canadian farmers affected the agricultural industry in Canada?
Well, I suspect in some areas there, as the introduction stated, that there's farmers that have probably delayed retiring simply due to some uncertainty as to who's going to take their land, or maybe instead of selling, they're leasing it and still being involved in the ongoing operations of their farm activities.
Well, what role do you think immigration could play in Canadian agriculture?
This gets to be a little bit troubling for me because, Evan was right that the temporary foreign worker program is really important, and we need a lot of people coming in to help with production, but it's seasonal. And so the worry I have is if we're looking at immigrants, they're not going to want to stick to a 6-month-a-year job. They're going to want to be trained and have a year-round job. So they'll come in, maybe do the agriculture production for 6 months. They'll get trained in something else, and then they'll move on to another job in the economy that's year round. And the challenge of so many agriculture jobs is that they are seasonal. And I'm struggling to see how changing a seasonal job is going to result in a foreign worker wanting to stay here for the whole year.
Something that struck me, though, is that right now a lot of farmers in, let's say, the Netherlands are not particularly happy with EU regulations, etc. You can sell a couple of hectares in the Netherlands and buy yourself a viable farming operation here. When I talk about that immigration, does that change the equation?
Yes, and I've actually heard, certainly some Dutch farmers and other European farmers are getting very frustrated with the onerous burden of regulations within the European Union. And you're right, they're selling small parcels of land and moving certainly to the prairies and reestablishing their farms. And this, I think, is probably something that's going to increase, and that would be a tremendous opportunity, because then we're bringing in highly skilled farmers that are capable of operating their businesses year round.
So when we talk about immigration, we're really talking about two different groups here: possible farmer, owner, operators, and farm labor.
Yes, I would agree,
Is that
Garth.
fair? Yeah.
Yeah, that we should be looking to, this would be a great time for the federal government to be advertising in Europe that, if you're fed up with government regulations, Canada's the place to move to start farming. So I think that would certainly bring in it would certainly create some opportunities for those farmers that would like to sell, and to be able to sell their entire operation to someone that's willing to come in and take the whole thing over.
Well, what type of training or support would immigrant farmers need to adapt to Canadian agriculture?
That's a good question, because we don't really have a specific training program for farm labor, and the jobs are so varied. So working in a dairy barn would be much different than, say working on a strawberry farm versus ranching in Alberta, and those are very unique skills that our colleges and universities and trade schools really haven't got anything set up to assist in those areas.
Now, what kind of supports are currently available for young Canadians who want to get into farming?
That's another challenge, and I talk to my students, and they recognize that is the biggest challenge, is being able to buy land, and a lot of them are starting young. They're in multi-generation large family farms, and these young adults are buying land as teenagers, starting out, and picking up half a section of land and as a teenager, and then paying that off and being able to draw on the equity within their family business to continue to build their operation as they work through transition planning over the course of their career. So I think there would be some programs that could be put in place to maybe supplement, making it a little bit easier for farmers, or young individuals that want to get into farming to be able to do so.
Okay, folks, if you're just joining us today, we're talking about a looming, perhaps crisis in Canadian agriculture, and that is a lack of farmers. A recent study by RBC shows that over 40% of farmers in Canada, a higher percentage in Saskatchewan, are looking to retire in the next decade, and most, 2/3, have no succession plan. So who will be the farmers of the future? Love to hear from you today, folks. If you are farming, do you have a succession plan? Do you know who's going to take over the farm? If you're a young person who'd like to get into farming, what are some of the barriers you face? And what are some of the answers? Is immigration one of the answers to the farm labor shortage? Stuart, I just want to talk about succession for a moment, because there's always been this belief, I guess, that if you come from a farm, your chances of going farming are that much greater. But I wonder, in the reality of today's farm, mom and dad are looking at the farm as their retirement income. do even their kids have $1 million or more to get started in farming?
Yeah, that's a great observation, Garth. That you're right. There are a lot of baby boom age farmers that are going to be looking to transition some of that wealth to their children, and and I think it requires a lot of planning. I see financial planners and tax accountants advising their farm clients to come in early and to start putting these transition plans in place so that suddenly if you wanted to retire in 2 or 3 years, that your children aren't scrambling to figure out how do we come up with the equity to buy out our parents. And so you're right that the sooner people get started on this, I think the easier it is for family farms to work through these through this issue.
Okay, I want to take our first caller. Chris is on the line in Regina. Hi, Chris.
Good afternoon, Garth. Yeah, I think I just wanted to offer some input or maybe raise a question about the notion of immigration addressing some of the farmer shortages. While it is certainly true that farmers, say, from a country like the Netherlands, because of the incredibly high costs of land overseas, by selling even a portion, perhaps, of their holdings, they could probably come up with the capital to finance an operation in Canada. But the part that I wonder about, and perhaps your guest can address this, is that if you look at, say, agriculture as it's practiced in Europe versus, say, the prairies, you're looking at very different approaches. The European approach is much more intensive because of differences in climate and the kinds of crops that are raised, versus a very much more sort of extensive approach on the prairies, where you've got typically much larger amounts of land. You've got large types of equipment that European farmers probably would not be used to operating. You've got concerns here in terms of crop rotations and tillage and all kinds of things to try to preserve soil quality. So I think I'm guessing that a lot of these people would be facing a very steep learning curve, moving from a European approach to a Canadian approach.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for that. That's a point well taken.
Okay.
What do you think, Stuart? I mean, my thought was, well, folks from Europe managed to do it 100 years ago, but farming has changed a lot since then. What do you think?
I think it's quite likely that most of the crops they would be growing in Europe are similar to here. They're growing cereals and pulses and oil seeds. They have a little, they don't have the genetically modified technology that we do here, but certainly these farmers travel internationally. They, many of them have been to Canada, the United States, Australia, where GM crops are grown. And the other thing that we've got is we've got an excellent system here of agrologists and agronomists. The chemical, the seed, the fertilizer companies all have representatives that talk to farmers. So there's a fantastic network of resources available to help new farmers. And I think it's pretty easy that they could be in touch and talk to agronomists or even their neighboring farmers and get advice on to what works. And certainly even the retiring farmers, I think in a lot of cases would be willing to stay around and do advise new farmers as to what works in certain fields and what doesn't work in another field, helping to transition that, making that knowledge transfer to the new farmer.
I'm going to share an email from Greg. Greg writes, our family has sacrificed too much to sell it outside the family. If the land is sold, it won't go to the well-financed land pigs. The world is heading to a renting class. Farm Credit Canada and regulations don't help. Stuart, I just want to take a moment of our time to talk about that, because this is something I've been hearing for quite some time now, and even from smaller farmers who own their land, that we're moving to, well, we're almost moving to a tenant farmer sort of model of agriculture. What are your thoughts?
I don't know that we're moving in quite that direction. I talk to students from all over this province and really all over the prairies, and we're seeing, I think, transitions to away from sort of individual family farms. So when I grew up, my dad had four other brothers, and each one of them farmed. They shared a little bit of equipment. But now, when I talk to students, you know, they're farming with their parents, but there could also be two or three or four other siblings of their parents, their grandparents that are. So we're seeing much larger family dimensions, and so as you've got Christian Hebert coming on a little bit later in the program, who farms down where I grew up, farming a sizable amount of land, but that involves a large number of family members involved in the organization of that business. And I think that's what we've seen the transition to, is from sort of individual family members farming to a much larger integrated family farm business.
And finally, before I let you go, Stuart, I'd like to pick your brain. What more do you think could be done to ensure sustainability of the industry in Canada and Saskatchewan in particular?
I think probably the thing we or farmers need is less regulation. The regulations are a big barrier to innovation, and we're seeing a lot of pressure from European-based environmental organizations providing a lot of misinformation about the safety of modern farm technologies. And I think the biggest threat to sustainable agriculture is needless government regulation.
Right. Stuart, thank you so much for your time and your expertise today. Now, our next guest has a unique perspective of how immigration can help meet the farming labor shortage. Rehan Khan had a family farm and worked in agriculture in Pakistan for 20 years. He left in 2018 so his kids could go to school in Canada. Now, Khan has a passion for agriculture. His day job is with Cargill, and he farms a quarter section near Yorkton, and he's on the line now. Rehan, thank you for your time.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm well, thank you again for your time. Rehan, what made you want to get into farming when you came to Canada?
Well, basically, it's all about agriculture. My whole career is with agriculture. My family, I am a son of farmer as well. So when I planned to move to Canada, then I was thinking like, what will be doing over there, because I am an agriculture graduate as well, and I did the farming. So then I choose this farming because that's my passion. And then I found this farm over here, and then started with this grain farming.
What do you grow? What do you farm?
Well, the first year in 2021, I did oats, but unfortunately that was the very drought year of the Canadian history, so that was not a good experience the first year. But then in 2022, last year, I did seed wheat. And for the upcoming season, I'm planning for the red lentils.
For what was that?
Lentils.
Lentils, yeah.
Yeah.
So overall, Rehan, what's your experience been like so far?
Well, it's the different things in my experience. For the immigrant farmers, and especially like if there's someone coming from this side of the world, like in Southeast Asia, so there's some different thing. Like over there, back home, what we used to do, there were small land holdings, equipments are there, but there are small equipments. Unlike over here in prairies, like we have like the big tractors, harvesters, and everything. And like the issue in the beginning, what I was facing was the first thing to find out a suitable land that fits into your budget as well. And then the startup cost, you cannot buy equipments over here. They are too costly. And then for the farming operations, you need for sure help of either your neighbor farmer, or you can go with some of the rental companies who does this field operation. But that is quite expensive as well. Yeah.
Now, how does the Saskatchewan Immigrant Nominee Program work for immigrants who want to get into agriculture?
I mean, the program is good, but the issue is, what I think is the investment. It's the economy of scale. I mean, if you have a big farm, so for sure you have more opportunities. You have the more option for the profitable farming. You can buy equipment or lease the equipment. But if you have a small investment, like I did, so then you can get like this, maybe a quarter of land or less than that. So for that, then you might have some other problems. So for the immigration department, I think uh, they can guide the immigrants who wanted to come over here when they are under the negotiation or under the filing application at that time. So the Saskatchewan Immigration Department, they can help them out in finding the suitable farm in which location they want, and then they give them the more updates, like what kind of problems they can face and how they can handle all those issues for them. So that will be a help, for them before landing over in Canada.
Um, Immigration aside, just as a person new to farming, Rihan, how hard is it to break into the industry right now?
You mean like for a new immigrant
Or
to enter?
for anybody, for that matter, immigrant or Canadian born, just how hard is it to get into the industry right now?
What I think, it's an investment. Like how much? Because right now, even in the past 2 years, the prices for the farm, they went up, and the input cost. If you compare what was the prices for example, for the fertilizer, the chemicals, the seeds in 2021 or 2020, and what are the prices right now? So there's a lot of difference. They've gone through the roof. So the investment is, to me, in my opinion, so you need a lot of investment right now for a good farming.
Do you think you'll ever be able to grow your farming operation to the point that it can be your full-time job?
Well, basically, I would need at least a section of land if I just give up my job and do a full-time, spend full-time for the farming. So then I would be able to earn that money that would be sufficient for my family. Otherwise, for this small farm, so I have to do, on the side, a job as well. Mm-hmm. I cannot survive on that only, on this.
Well, do you see a day in the future, Rihan, or is it even a hope of yours that you would at some point be able to buy enough land to make a sustainable farming operation out of it?
Yeah, for sure. I have a plan, like maybe in a couple of years, I would be investing some more money in it and would be buying renting some more land. And I plan it should be like at least a section of land. And so that would be sustainable. And because now my future and everything, what it is over here, that is with agriculture. And ultimately, I have to expand my farming operations and everything in the coming 2-3 years.
Based on what you know now, Rihan, what would you tell a young Pakistani thinking of coming to Canada to be a farmer?
Well, if someone plans to come, he should do a bit more research, like before coming over here. There are different things, like number one, how much money he has to invest over here, because at the same time, not only the investment, but he has to give a good faith deposit to the immigration department as well. And then he should think about like where he's going to buy his farm and how much the land he's getting. For example, if he's getting only the quarter of land, so he should think about it from where he would be getting the help for the farming operation. He won't be able to buy this equipment and everything. So all these things, he should do a bit more research, get connected with someone who is already here, whether his friend or someone from some other online the media sources, or through the SINP if they can help them out for that purpose. So that he should not feel uncomfortable after landing, like where I should go to buy the land and where I should get the help for the operations and everything. So that would be a tough for him, anyone who would be coming without any preparation.
All right. Rehan, thanks so much for your help today.
Thank you very much.
Rehan Khan has a farm near Yorkton. And again, folks, that's our conversation today. According to an RBC report released, I think it came out last week or the week before, but either way, it doesn't paint a very pretty picture of the future of agriculture, at least not as we know it. Over 40% of Canadian farmers, a higher percentage in Saskatchewan, are looking to retire in the next decade, and 2/3 of them have no succession plan. So who will be the farmers of the future? And as we've heard so far, there are a lot of barriers stopping young Canadians or new immigrants from getting into agriculture, especially as owner-operators. So what are your thoughts, folks? If you are farming, I'd love to hear if you have a farm succession plan. And if not, why not? If you do have one, how did you work it out? And what are your thoughts about who's going to farm 20 years from now? Give us a call with your thoughts today. It's 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Let's hear from Paul Emile, north of Nipawin. Hi, Paul Emile.
Yeah, hi, Garth. Before I get to my main point, I didn't want to hear what your previous guest said about regulations. Come to Saskatchewan from Europe. Maybe there are fewer regulations, and we need to remove more regulations. That's not what the average consumer probably wants to hear, because that usually means the destruction of some part of the environment. I know what he's thinking. My main point is this. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, I heard on the radio about South Korea, the government paying young people to get out of the house, to get out of the basement. They're paying them money to just get out and be alive and get involved with their society. We're not that far from there, I'm thinking, unfortunately. For example, I know a few neighbors. One in particular that I'm thinking about has a gorgeous farm, beautiful house, every building you want on the farm, beautiful equipment, all up to date, and his son wants nothing to do with it. So when there's a will to pass it on to your children, there's a way. There's usually a will by the owner, the father or the mother, the parents of the family farm, but there's not always a will by the children. They don't want to work that hard, especially 6 months of the year if they're just grain farming and not a mixed farm. They want their summers off. They don't want to go through that. And so they're passing on, taking over the family farm. And I don't know what the percentage would be in Saskatchewan, but I suspect that it's more common than we realize that the children they want to be where the action is in the city. They want to travel. They want to do whatever. And so I think that, it's part of a whole society's trend of not wanting to work that hard, I'm thinking.
All right. Well, Paul Emile, you bring in an interesting aspect of the equation. We've been talking about young farmers being unable to get into farming, but your point is well taken that a lot of young people don't want to get into farming, and especially young people who grew up on the farm. So interesting point. Paul Emile, thanks so much for the call.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Christian Herbert not only thinks about succession planning in his own operation, he encourages other farmers to plan for who will take over their farm as well. Hebert is a farmer near Moosomin. He's also a consultant with Hebert Grain Ventures. He's on the line now. Christian, thanks for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Tell us about your operation. What kind of farm do you have? How big is the operation?
Yeah, so we run a grain operation just south of Moosomin, Saskatchewan, a little town called Fairlight. Kind of grow wheat, canola, barley, peas, oats, fall rye. We'll crop just over 30,000 acres this year. But, I'd go back that my dad's first crop was in 78, and it was 320 acres.
So since 1978, your family farm has gone from 300 and some acres to 3,000 or 30,000 and some acres?
Yeah.
Am I getting those numbers right?
Yes, you are.
How many people do you employ then altogether?
We'd be right around 15 full-time. That includes a couple family members, obviously myself and my father and my wife and my mom. And then we'd have another between 12 and 15 really good part-time staff.
And, as Stuart Smythe pointed out earlier, that seasonal work, how do you retain those employees?
So most of my seasonal staff we either bring over from Australia and New Zealand on it's called the International Exchange visa. It works really good for them to come work on farms through the growing season and then say go out to Banff and do some skiing in the winters. And then we have a number of people that work, their full-time job is at the mine and they come to us in seeding and harvest on their days off. Works really well. And then I've also got some retired farmers that, they were ready to retire from farming, but they weren't ready to fully retire. So they're really, really committed in seeding and harvest for me and really enjoy it.
Well, how do you find the workers, and especially at those busy times, to farm like over 30,000 acres?
Well, I mean, the acres is just one point. I mean, I think in my mind, we plan for every one full-time person for every 2,000 acres. So it doesn't really matter to me if you're a 2,000 acre farmer or 10 or 30. That's about how the numbers work out. It costs me about 1 hour paid for every acre. So I'm going to pay out 30,000 hours. And we just, it's just running a business, no different than if you have a car dealership in town or an input retail in town. You treat your people well and pay them well and create a culture that they want to be around. And I think that can be infectious for both your full-time people and your part-time people. And I do think the one thing COVID did is it brought agriculture back into the limelight, and that producing food for the world is important. And showing up to work every day on the farm, we do feel that we're lucky in that we get to do something that affects the whole world.
I'm curious because I'm still I find it remarkable that your family in the course of a generation went from a couple of quarters to 30-some thousand acres. But why was it important to get bigger?
Well, when I moved, so I'm a recovering accountant by trade. I'm a CPA by trade, and to be honest, when I was younger, there was days I almost felt the farm was a monster. It kept my dad away from coaching hockey sometimes because we couldn't get enough staff, and that honestly was the number side of farming that brought me back and worked with my parents. And really, we only got bigger as we found good people. My goal was to be 8,000 acres. That worked right for equipment. And then opportunities came up to continue growing. And what we found was if it's just you and your dad and one of you gets sick, that's a huge problem when it comes to workload and stress. But with 15 full-time people, to be honest, if someone needs a day off to go to the doctor, or if they coach hockey, that we can spread that work around 14 people. So I know it sounds a little bit weird, but honestly, being a little bit larger has helped us manage our work-life balance, and having more people around has allowed us to have more opportunities to grow.
You recently wrote a blog post titled "Old MacDonald Doesn't Exist, He Went Bankrupt." What's the message you have for people there?
My message there is I do a fair bit of work with both the provincial and the federal government on some statistics. And the one thing that's getting used against us in agriculture right now a little bit is the number of farms that say implement sustainable practices. And I think there's a large difference between the number of farms that implement it and the number of acres that do. StatsCan includes very, very, very small farms in their calculations, which I'm not saying is wrong. What I am saying is the number of acres that implement sustainable practices is what meets the environmental goals that we're having both globally and in Canada. And I know a lot of very progressive farms that are doing great jobs, right from 1,500 acres up to 100,000 acres. And so there's a difference between what I would call a hobby, a part-time farm, and a full-time farm.
I want to share this email from Judy and get your thoughts. Judy writes, large corporate farms and wealth management funds without a province shareholders are distorting the value of farmland in Saskatchewan. A couple of farmers rented land for over 20 years. One had 18 quarters, another had over 30 quarters, and could not compete with large corporate farms with shareholders who offered $182 an acre. If it was not feasible for those farmers to pay that, and if this continues, it will totally eliminate any chance of young farmers starting up. I just want to deal with one aspect of Judy's email, and that is the concern over corporate farms. And in fairness, Christian, we could have a conversation about whether you're a family farm or a corporate farm, but Judy is really talking about funds from outside the province pushing up land prices. What's your experience?
Yeah, so there's definitely investors buying up some land. I would say farms are probably paying as much as investors in a lot of situations. And there's a pro and a con to this. So I mean, when the investors come in, the pro is for a younger farmer that can't afford to say buy 18 quarters, they can only buy 3 or 4, but they want to farm it all. They could use an investor to buy that land and rent it back. The con is if you want to buy all 18 quarters, you're going to compete against that investor, but you're also probably going to compete against another couple of farms. But the other flip side I always want to bring in too is there's also a number of farmers that are trying to sell their land in order to finish farming. And don't get me wrong, I'd love low land prices. It would make my life easier. But at the same time, I have to be cognizant of those that are on the other side of the table and trying to sell their land. And obviously, with more demand, they get more money. Now, so far within Canada, we've done a pretty good job of limiting, the money that's available to buy land compared to other countries, especially in Saskatchewan. So, like I said, I can see both sides of that story. And yeah, I understand the corporate farm comment. I know a lot of farms, and I personally don't know any that have a whole bunch of investment shareholdings that everybody dreams about. There's a lot of, I'd say there's a lot of conspiracy theory there. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of farms incorporated for a whole bunch of reasons, some tax incentives, but basically the liability and the ability to transfer it through generations it can be simpler in a company versus not in a company. But so is your local car dealership, your local McDonald's. They're all incorporated too, and we don't seem to hold it against them if they grow.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are some of your thoughts on how we help out the smaller farmers, like Rayhan Khan that we spoke to earlier, or young Canadians who are passionate about farming, but their operation is by necessity small. It doesn't make sense to invest in the big, expensive and high tech equipment. Is there a future for that kind of farmer?
So, I mean, I think I'd go down the path of a farm's no different than any other small business in town. And how do any of these people go down the paths? And I think there's almost a bit of an opportunity for farmers like him. And as we said, there's 66% of farms that don't have a succession plan, but maybe don't want to completely sell out. I think we need to set up some programs for these young farmers and immigrant farmers to get paired up with retiring farmers and work in like joint ventures and collaboration where they rent the land, maybe from the retiring farmer and use some of their money with a return on equity. Because a lot of these retiring farmers don't want to just sell everything out and put it in a New York hedge fund. That's not what they find comfort in. So I actually think there's a lot of opportunities in collaboration and joint ventures between with the number of farms that don't have succession plans and the younger people and the immigrant farmers that are moving to Canada.
Mm-hmm. Now, I understand you did your own social media poll recently asking farmers about their succession plan. Anecdotally, what did you find?
Yeah, I mean, pretty similar to the RBC report. I'd say 40 to 50% have at least thought about it, and the other 50 to 60 don't have one or don't think they need one. And I think that's what I would say is a number of farmers love farming. They love growing crops, and that's what they're really good at. And succession plans are way more kind of about the business and how are we going to treat your real estate versus your farming operating company and human resource plans. And that's really, it's just not something that a lot of farms find fun. And so I think we need to find ways to get the right consultants and the right people in the industry working with them that they trust, and we could do a lot better job of that statistic.
All right. Christian, thanks so much for your help today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Christian Hebert is with Hebert Grain Ventures. He farms 32,000 acres near Moosomin. And again, folks, we're talking about the future of agriculture in Canada. RBC reports, and as Christian just mentioned, about 40% of farmers nationwide, a little higher percentage of that in Saskatchewan, are looking to retire in the next 10 years. 2/3 have no succession plan. So who's going to farm the land in the future? And as we've determined today, it's a difficult task for young people to get into farming, even if they grew up on the farm. As Paul Emile pointed out, a lot of young people who grew up on the farm have no interest in taking over the farm. For young people and immigrants, again, there are the financial barriers to getting into a farming operation. Love to hear your thoughts today, folks. How do we go about making sure that there's somebody to farm the land in the future? And is the answer is Christian's the answer? Grow to like over 30,000 acres. Is that the only way to be sustainable? Anyway, give us a call with your thoughts. We're at 1-800-716-2221. Get to your calls in just a moment. But our next guest says there are people right here in Canada who'd like to get into farming, but the cost is prohibitive. Lois Wall and her husband have been wanting to get into farming for decades. They live near Swift Current. Lois is on the line now. Hi, Lois.
Oh, hi, Garth. Thank
Lois,
you.
Thank you. Lois, what are you seeing in your area of the province? If somebody wants to buy farmland, how accessible is it?
If you have the capital and the finances, then yes, you can do it. But if you are starting out and haven't got the capital, it's pretty well impossible. I just know a few kids that are the same age as my son, and they would love to farm. They got a few animals or one or two quarters they're renting that they're trying to make a go of it. But unless you have a family to inherit it or like transfer the company over to you, it's very difficult because of the price of the land and the equipment. I really think they need to get the information out there to the older farmers about succession planning, because my own father did not have a proper succession plan, and if you did try and talk to him about it, it was very kind of a dead-end conversation, and he was from the age where you just, worked your tail off and virtually nothing, and then when the father decided that he couldn't do it anymore, well, then you carried on kind of a thing. And so in the end, his desire for the farm to be transferred to the family didn't happen because there wasn't the finances there. And so, of course, then the farm is dissolved. And personally, my own self, I managed to stay in the company, but basically we had to sell 3/4 of the company off in order to pay out to all the relatives. And so now, at the age of 60, I now own 3/4 of land, which is not a very big farm at all. And we will try and feed it to hay and stuff. But I just see some of the young kids around here. It's like the one fellow, if they aren't interested, well, then that's an awkward situation. But the fellows that I have seen, they really are working their tails off. They've got the jobs, and then they also go and do their farming after work. Like some of my friends that did farm, they always had to have a off-farm income to start with in order to make a go of it. When we were investigating things, there was a lady by the name of Elaine Froese, and she is a succession planner. And we had never even heard of her until all of a sudden the farm was coming up. But of course, our situation was such an urgent thing that you couldn't plan for any of that. But she has a wealth of knowledge, and I think they need to do some more education in that regard.
Okay, well, Lois, what do you think would be helpful in supporting people from here in Saskatchewan get into agriculture?
Well, your last caller made a very good suggestion, I thought. I'd never even thought of it myself about having a retiring farmer work with a young farmer who wants to start farming. Like, there is actually a fellow here who unfortunately passed away, but he apparently started working with a nephew quite a number of years ago as the young chap graduated from grade 12, and now they're in the process of working to transfer it over to him and his father. So it's forward thinking that's really required. But it is very difficult still because, just down here we have an enormous farmer, and it is like a tenant farming situation with them because it's a big corporation. They have a CEO and everything. And when he buys land, if there's a yard on it, he will then turn around and rent the house to his employee. And there's a lot of that going on around here. He's had many immigrants come here either from Mexico or now Ukraine, where he's hiring them, which is good for them. They have a job, but they're just employees. And like it's an enormous company. Like it has land in Arizona and BC, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. It's just a monstrous company, and you can't compete when you're bidding for land prices. Like I tried to buy a quarter section of land last year that for cattle. It was a poor piece of land, and the animal units were only 12 pairs a season for grazing, and it went for $175,000. Well, you sell 12 calves in the fall, you're not going to be making your costs or your loan payment. Right. So
Okay, Lois,
you're up against that sort of thing.
Okay, Lois, thanks so much. We have to move on, but thank you very much for taking part today. Thanks.
No problem. This is really cool. Thanks. Bye.
Now, some of the large farming operations in this province are farmed collectively by Hutterite communities. Paul Hofer is secretary of the Swift Current Hutterite Colony. He's on the line now. Paul, thank you for taking our call.
Yes, thank you very much.
Paul, how big is the colony's operation?
The colony operation is 20,000 acres, and we have 80 people on it.
So,
And I listened to your caller there. We have no trouble getting our young children to farm. Like we teach them how to farm. You train on the job.
do you feel it's necessary to continue to grow the colony's farming operation?
Oh yes, we feel very much to grow and continue on with farming too.
At what point?
If you, as I told your one of the ladies that phoned me up here a few days ago, with 20,000 acres and 80 people, you divide it into that. That's 250 acres per person. You can't make much living of that. So we are kind of diversified. We have, we're in different, like agriculture and milking and hens, and eggs and stuff like that.
How often are you able to acquire more land from nearby farmers retiring?
As soon as there's some come up for sale, we give it a try. But when we come here 40 years ago, we bought land for $50,000 a quarter. Now it's up to over $400,000 a quarter. But we always give it a try. But there's guys that outbid us.
How big does a colony get, Paul, before you split off into a daughter colony?
As a rule, it's supposed to be 135. So we have quite a ways to go yet. We've been here for over 40 years. And we come here with around 80, and we're still around 80. That's with debts and people marrying away and stuff like that.
Right, so you have no daughter colonies then?
No, not yet. Oh. We come from a daughter colony in 1978, from mother colony.
Again, just before I let you go, Paul, I just want to emphasize what you were saying about land prices. What's happened to land prices in the time that you've been on the farm there in Swift Current or near Swift Current?
Well, I guess the price of grain, as the price of grain rose, the land rose too, like with the price. And so that's why land did come up.
So what's a quarter section of cropland around Swift Current going for these days?
We bid on the last stuff that we tried to get was over 420,000. We didn't get it. That's a quarter, 160 acres.
Okay, and that's cropland, not pasture land.
That's cropland. Yes, but we do rent a little. And the rent, we're renting the three parties that we rent from all the same price. Like, we're not as high as some of them are, and maybe that's why they got a chance to get first hand on it. But we don't care. We'll make a living of what we've got.
All right. Paul, thanks so much for taking our call and having a conversation with me today.